This story. What was under that hood will change the way you see every person you have ever underestimated. The car was parked just outside the garage on the short gravel strip beside the house. Wyatt had owned it for 11 years, inherited it the winter after his father passed, and in all that time he had never once considered painting it. The exterior was a study in neglect, if a stranger were being unkind about it, which strangers often were. The original red had oxidized over the decades into a deep, uneven rust brown. One rear panel had a shallow dent near the wheel well. The chrome strip along the passenger door had gone dull. The logo on the hood, once sharp and immediately recognizable to anyone who knew anything about Italian engineering, had faded to the point where most people simply couldn't place it. Most people looked at the car and saw a problem to be solved. Wyatt looked at it and saw his father. Luna opened the passenger door herself and climbed in, settling the engine model carefully on her lap. She looked out the windshield as Wyatt started the engine. And the engine, that extraordinary, impossible engine, turned over with a low, unhurried authority that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with what it was made of. "We going past the fountain today?" Luna asked. "We're going past the Hartman building," Wyatt said. "Your school is running the science fair in that courtyard this year. Remember?" "Oh," she said. Then after a moment, "Can we still see the fountain?" If we're early enough. They were early enough. The Hartman building sat on the western edge of the financial district, 12 floors of glass and dark steel, the kind of structure that announced its own importance before you had read the name above the entrance. Hartman and Associates occupied the top 3 floors. The company consulted on capital investment, acquisition strategy, and asset valuation for clients across North America and Western Europe. It was, by most measures, extraordinarily successful. It was run by a 34-year-old woman named Giselle Hartman, who had built it from a 2-person operation in a sublet office into the firm whose name appeared in financial publications 3 or 4 times a month. That morning, Giselle was on her 3rd call before she had finished her coffee. She drove herself, which she considered a point of personal discipline. The car was a Porsche Cayenne in graphite gray, maintained on a service contract, washed weekly. She believed, and had said so, publicly, more than once, that the way a person maintained the things they owned was a direct indication of how they approached their professional responsibilities. It was a philosophy she had developed in her mid-20s when she was building the firm from nothing and needed frameworks for fast judgment. She had never stopped to examine whether the framework was accurate. It had always seemed obvious enough. Carter Blake, her chief financial officer, was waiting at the building entrance when she arrived, holding 2 folders and his own coffee, in a grip that suggested he had been standing there for some time. Carter was 41, well-dressed, and constitutionally incapable of disagreeing with Giselle on anything that might affect his proximity to power. He was useful for certain things. Giselle understood what he was, even if she had never articulated it to herself in those terms. Diana Walsh was already upstairs at her desk. Diana was 30 years old and had worked as Giselle's personal assistant for nearly 4 years. She was organized, quiet, and possessed of a precision that Giselle valued without fully understanding. Diana did not fill silence for the sake of it. She did not laugh at things she did not find funny. These were qualities Giselle had catalogued as professional virtues, though she had not spent much time considering what they said about Diana as a person. Diana's father, Harold Walsh, was 68 years old and had spent 40 years as a restoration specialist for antique and vintage automobiles. He had retired to a house in western Massachusetts, where he kept 3 unfinished restoration projects in a barn, and received weekly calls from his daughter about subjects that had nothing to do with cars, until recently. The morning Giselle pulled into the building's private parking structure, she saw the car before she saw the man. It was parked in the visitor section, 2 spaces from her reserved spot, and it stopped her cold in a way that expensive, beautiful things occasionally stopped other people. Not because it was beautiful, because it was not. It sat low on its wheels, the paint a mottled reddish-brown that had clearly once been something else, the rear glass carrying a hairline fracture along the lower left corner. The car's age was impossible to determine at first glance, which was itself unusual. Most old cars announced their decade. This one refused to be placed. Giselle stepped out of her Cayenne. She looked at the car. Then she looked at the man who had just stepped out of it. He was perhaps 37 or 38, with the kind of forearms that came from actual labor and not a gym, wearing dark work pants and a plain gray shirt. His hair was not recently cut. He looked like someone who had driven to the building to drop something off, or to inquire about a delivery, or to collect a form. He did not look, to Giselle, like someone who had any professional business in her building. He was reaching into the back seat to lift out a small girl who was clutching a model engine to her chest. Carter appeared at Giselle's side, having walked across from the entrance. He looked at the car. He smiled slightly, the way people smile when they expect someone else to say the thing they are thinking. Giselle said it. Is that actually parked here? Her voice carried without effort. The parking structure was not full at that hour, and sound traveled cleanly between the concrete pillars. Several people who had just arrived turned around. I was under the impression this was a private facility. The man stood straight with the girl in one arm. He looked at Giselle without particular expression. Not defiant, not embarrassed, just present, the way a mountain is present without any apparent concern for what you thought about it. We have a visitor pass, he said. His voice was unhurried. Science fair. The school is using the east courtyard. Giselle walked a slow arc around the car, the way she sometimes walked around a conference table when she was deciding something. Her heels clicked on the painted concrete. She looked at the hood, at the peeling chrome, at the dented panel. She looked at the logo that no longer resolved into anything recognizable. What is this, even? She said it the way someone says it when they do not actually want an answer. This is a museum piece. A sad museum piece. Carter laughed. Two junior associates who had been heading toward the elevator stopped walking. The man said nothing. He set the girl gently on the ground, crouched to her height, and spoke quietly to her. The girl nodded. Her face was turned slightly away from Giselle, but even so, the angle of her small shoulders communicated something that made at least one person in that parking structure feel the first flicker of discomfort. That person was Diana, who had come down to hand Giselle a folder she had left in the car the previous evening, and had arrived at the edge of the parking structure in time to hear everything. She stood still, holding the folder against her chest, watching. I think we should head in, she said to Giselle, her tone neither sharp nor soft. Giselle looked at her, then back at the car, then at the man, who had stood up and was taking the girl's hand. Enjoy the science fair, Giselle said. The lightness in her voice did not make it kinder. Wyatt nodded once. Thank you. He said it without irony and without warmth, as if he were acknowledging a neutral fact about the weather, and walked his daughter toward the courtyard entrance. Luna did not look back, but as she walked, she asked her father a question quietly enough that only he could hear it, and it was this. Dad, did she not like our car? And Wyatt held her hand a little tighter and said nothing at all, because some questions only need to be asked and do not need an answer. Diana stood alone in the parking structure for a moment after Giselle had gone inside. She looked at the car. She had noticed, when Giselle was walking around it, that the hood was not fully latched, a common thing with older vehicles, the secondary latch worn smooth. The gap was narrow, an inch at most, but in the morning light it was enough. She had seen a partial view of the engine bay. What she had seen did not match anything she should have expected to see in a car that looked like this from the outside. She took out her phone and photographed the gap, the angle of the engine visible beneath, the configuration of the components she could make out. Then she put the phone in her pocket and went inside, carrying the folder and saying nothing to anyone. That evening, after Giselle had gone home and Carter had gone home and the office had mostly emptied, Diana sat at her kitchen table and enlarged the photograph on her laptop. Her father's books were on the shelf behind her, a row of specialized volumes on vintage European automobiles, marks and mechanics and history, the kind of books that accumulate in houses where someone spent a career caring about the subject. She pulled one down, cross-referenced the engine configuration visible in the photo against the illustrations in the chapter she was looking for. Then she called her father. Harold Walsh answered on the second ring, as he always did, from whatever corner of his barn he was occupying that evening. I have a question, Diana said. About an engine. There was the sound of a tool being set down. Go ahead. She described what she had seen. The configuration of the intake manifold, the unusual routing of the oil lines, the shape of the valve covers, which were unlike anything in current production and unlike most things in vintage production that she had ever encountered. Harold was quiet for a long time. "The oil lines?" he said finally. "You said they run in a V shape off the secondary block?" "Yes. And the valve covers are ribbed lateral ribs, not longitudinal?" "Yes." Another silence. Then, "Diana, where did you see this car?" She told him. He was quiet again. "It could be nothing," he said. "Could be a custom build, someone who knew what they were doing. But if it's what I think it might be, if the chassis matches, and if there's any provenance on that engine, that car is not what it looks like from the outside. What do you think it is?" He told her what he thought it might be, and she wrote it down on the notepad beside her laptop and looked at what she had written for a long moment before she said anything else. The following morning, she found Wyatt Cole in the East Courtyard, collecting his daughter at the end of the science fair. Luna had won second place and was carrying a blue ribbon that was technically red, but she kept calling blue, and Wyatt was listening to her correction of the judge's methodology with the focused attention of someone who genuinely found a 7-year-old's technical arguments interesting. Diana approached at a distance that gave him the opportunity to acknowledge her before she was already upon him. "Mr. Cole." She stopped a few feet away. "I wanted to apologize for yesterday morning. What was said in the parking structure was discourteous. I'm sorry you experienced it." He looked at her for a moment with the same unhurried quality he had shown the previous day. "You weren't the one who said anything. I know. But I was there." He considered this, nodded slightly, as if the distinction she was making had some value. "Your daughter is very good," Diana said. Looking at the model engine Luna was now holding up to show a passing stranger who had not asked to see it. "That's a real build. Most kids bring posters." "She put it together herself," Wyatt said. "I showed her the instructions once." "I noticed the engine yesterday," Diana said then, and she said it carefully, watching his face. "Your engine. The configuration. I have some background. My father was a restoration specialist for 40 years. Something shifted in Wyatt's expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the slight alertness of someone who has heard a familiar word in an unexpected place. "You know about engines," he said. "Some. Enough to know that what I saw through your hood was not a standard configuration." He studied her for a moment. She met his eyes without looking away, which she suspected was the only thing that convinced him to do what he did next. He walked to the car, which was still parked in the visitor section, and he lifted the hood. Diana stepped forward and looked into the engine bay. She was quiet for a long time. She moved her angle slightly to catch the light differently. She leaned in and looked at the left side of the engine block, toward the rear, where the light was weakest. There were letters there, written in what appeared to be white paint marker or paint pen, the strokes deliberate and unhurried. A signature in a script that she recognized not from having seen it in person, but from the reproduction she had seen in her father's book, on the frontispiece where it had been used as a chapter header, a piece of history preserved in print. She stepped back. She did not realize she had raised her hand to cover her mouth until she felt the pressure of her own fingers against her lips. "Is this real?" she asked. "Yes," Wyatt said. "Do you know what the car is worth?" He looked at the engine the same way he always looked at it, not with assessment, not with ownership, but with something closer to conversation. "I don't think about it that way." That evening, Diana called her father again and told him what she had seen, and Harold Walsh sat in his barn in western Massachusetts and was quiet for so long that she thought the call had dropped. Then he said, simply, "God." And then he said, "That man needs to protect that car." Diana said, "I think he already is." 3 weeks later, Hartman and Associates required an independent valuation specialist for the American portion of a major acquisition. The client was Marco Gentile, a 70-year-old Italian collector whose family had been acquiring significant automotive assets since the 1950s. He was relocating a portion of his collection to the United States and needed an expert without a financial stake in the transaction, someone whose reputation in the field was clean and whose judgment would be trusted by both parties. The name that emerged from every independent source Carter consulted was the same name, Wyatt Cole. Carter brought the file to Giselle's office on a Thursday afternoon and set it on the desk without preamble. She looked at the photograph on the cover page, a standard professional headshot, the kind used for consulting registries. She recognized the face. "The man from the parking lot," she said. "He's considered one of the top 5 independent appraisers on the East Coast for pre-1970 European vehicles," Carter said. "Collectors in Paris and Milan request him specifically. He doesn't have a firm, works independently by referral only." Giselle looked at the file. The transaction was significant enough that getting the valuation wrong would cost the firm its relationship with Gentile's family, which had been a client prospect for 2 years. Getting it right would mean a referral network in European collector circles that money could not simply buy. "Set up the meeting," she said. Diana made the call. Wyatt answered and listened and did not say anything for a moment when Diana told him the firm's name. She waited. "All right," he said. "Send me the asset list, and I'll be there Thursday." He arrived on Thursday at 2 in the afternoon in the same car, parked in the same visitor section, and wore a jacket over a plain white shirt. He was not dressed for performance. He was dressed the way someone dresses when they have somewhere to be, and see no reason to manufacture significance through clothing. The conference room on the 9th floor had 8 people in it when he entered. Giselle at the head of the table, Carter on her right, 3 associates along one side, Diana in the corner with a notepad, and 2 representatives of Marco Gentile's management team at the far end. Wyatt sat, opened his folder, and began. He spoke for 45 minutes. He went through the Gentile collection's documentation with a specificity that required no performance. The chassis numbers, the build dates, the provenance gaps he had identified, and the methods he had used to fill them, the single vehicle in the collection whose documentation he considered unreliable, and his reasons for that conclusion. He was not lecturing. He was simply describing what he knew in the way that people describe things when they have spent 20 years knowing them. Carter took 3 pages of notes. Giselle said nothing for 45 minutes, which was unusual. She was a person who spoke in meetings, who interrupted when she saw a better direction, who maintained her authority in a room by being its most present voice. She sat and listened and did not interrupt once. When Wyatt finished, the Gentile representatives exchanged a look that conveyed they were satisfied. Carter began discussing fee structures. Giselle stayed after the room cleared. Diana began to gather her things slowly, sensing that she should remain nearby but not visibly. Giselle looked at Wyatt across the now empty conference table. He was capping his pen, not watching her, and there was nothing in his posture that suggested he was waiting for anything from her. "The other morning," she said. He looked up. "I wasn't." She stopped. She was a woman who did not fumble sentences. She started again. "What I said in the parking structure was unkind. I said it publicly, which made it worse." She paused. "I'm saying this directly, not through a representative. I was wrong." Wyatt looked at her for a moment, with that same quality she had noticed in the parking lot. Not hard, not soft, just even. "I appreciate that," he said. "That's all?" Carter had said, earlier, when she had told him she was planning to apologize directly. He had meant it as a caution, as though direct acknowledgement of fault carried some professional cost. She had ignored him. "I have a daughter," Wyatt said then. He closed his folder. "She asked me that evening if people didn't like our car. She's 7. She doesn't need to absorb someone else's bad morning." The sentence landed quietly. Giselle said nothing. There was nothing to say. "But yes," he said. "That's all." And he stood up and picked up his folder and headed for the door. Diana watched him go, and then watched Giselle, who was looking at the surface of the conference table with an expression that Diana had never seen on her face before and could not immediately name. The Gentile event was held 2 weeks later at a hotel in the Back Bay. The building's ballroom had been arranged for the occasion, vehicles from the collection displayed on the floor, documentation in glass cases along the walls, buyers and journalists and specialists moving through the space. It was the kind of event that drew people who owned things most people never got to see, and the kind of coverage that reached a small but very specific audience who cared deeply about what was being shown. Wyatt arrived at 7:45 in the morning to complete his preliminary review before the event opened. He drove the same car. The hotel's parking attendant, a young man of about 20, watched the car approach his station with an expression of mild concern, as though he was trying to calculate whether he was allowed to refuse it. Wyatt handed him the parking slip for the reserved expert spaces, and the attendant looked at it and waved him through without a word. Inside, the setup was nearly complete. Carter was overseeing the positioning of the last display stands, with the focused urgency of someone who had been there since 6. Diana was coordinating with the hotel's event staff near the entrance. 3 photographers from automotive publications were testing their equipment along the east wall. Marco Gentile arrived at 8:30 in a car that was, in its own right, remarkable. A 1963 vehicle that had been maintained with the kind of obsessive precision that only comes from genuine love of the object. He was a small man, white-haired, with the unhurried movement of someone who had long since stopped trying to impress anyone and found the freedom in that considerable. He wore a dark suit and carried no phone that anyone could see. He stepped out of his vehicle, paused to exchange a word with his driver, and then walked toward the hotel entrance. He would have walked straight in had something not stopped him. The car, Wyatt's car, was parked near the accessible entrance, apart from the other vehicles in the reserved section, and Marco Gentile stopped walking when he saw it. He stopped completely, the way people stop when something triggers a recognition so strong that the body simply halts to process it. He walked toward the car. His personal assistant, a woman who had worked for him for 12 years and was not easily surprised, watched him change direction without explanation and followed at a slight distance, unsure what was happening. Marco stood in front of the car and looked at it for a long time. He walked slowly around it, studying the lines of the body, the configuration of the hood. He bent down to look at the angle of the front wheel wells. He straightened and looked at the side profile again. Then he said something in Italian. His assistant translated quietly, though there was no one nearby to hear it yet. He said he recognized the hood design. He said he had seen the engineering drawings for this configuration years ago, among documents his father had kept in their house in Maranello. Diana, who had stepped outside briefly and was watching from the entrance, went back in and found Wyatt and told him quietly that Marco Gentile was standing next to his car in the parking area and appeared very interested in it. Wyatt set down his coffee and went outside. By then, Carter had come out as well, and 2 of the photographers, drawn by the unusual sight of Marco Gentile standing in a parking lot examining what appeared to be an unpresentable vehicle, with the focused attention he usually reserved for verified masterpieces. Giselle came out last. She had been in a call and had ended it early when Diana appeared in the doorway and said, with the particular economy she used when something significant was happening, "You should come outside." Marco turned when he heard footsteps. He saw Wyatt approaching, and he recognized him from their work together over the previous days. "This is yours," Marco said. It was not a question. "It was my father's," Wyatt said. Marco looked back at the car. He placed one hand very gently on the front fender, not possessively, but the way someone might touch a shoulder in greeting. "Your father," he said. "Where did he work?" "He was a mechanic. He went to Maranello in 1972 on a technical exchange. One season." Marco's expression shifted in a way that was difficult to read from a distance, something between recognition and grief, the look of a person recalibrating a belief they had held for a long time. "There was a program," Marco said slowly, as though remembering a dream. "My father spoke of it. American engineers, some German, a small group. There was a prototype series that never went into production. This is one of them," Wyatt said. Marco looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "May I see the engine?" Wyatt looked at the people who had gathered. Carter with his folders and his performance of professional relevance. The photographers with their cameras half raised, waiting. Giselle, standing still, a step behind the others, watching. He unlocked the car and lifted the hood. Marco stepped forward. He moved with a slowness that suggested deliberateness rather than age, and he leaned into the engine bay with the kind of attention that other people brought to great paintings, or to first editions, or to faces they had been trying to remember. He used a small pen light he kept in his jacket pocket, and he moved it with precision, and the room, if a parking area can be a room, was entirely silent. The light reached the left side of the engine block. Marco Gentile stood up straight. He placed his hands flat on the edge of the engine bay for a moment, and the stillness of his hands was the most eloquent thing anyone present had witnessed in some time. He said one sentence in Italian. His voice was steady but not entirely. His assistant translated in a near whisper, though by then, several people were close enough to hear both. He says this is the signature. He says he knows the hand. He has seen this script on a document, an original document, in the company archive in Maranello, dating to 1971. One of the photographers raised his camera. Another had already been recording on video for the past 45 seconds. Carter said something to Giselle in an undertone. She did not appear to hear him. She was looking at the engine block from where she stood, and from her angle, she could not quite see the signature. But she could see Marco Gentile's face, and she could see Wyatt's, and the difference between those two faces was this. Marco's held the stunned joy of a person who has just been given back something they believed was lost forever, and Wyatt's held nothing new at all. He had always known. He had always carried it. There was nothing on his face that had not been there for 11 years. Giselle thought of the parking structure, of her own voice, loud and deliberately carried, of the girl with the model engine who had asked her father a quiet question as they walked away. She thought of the word she had used. Sad. The feeling that moved through her was not comfortable, and she did not try to make it comfortable. She let it stand where it was, because that seemed like the least she could do. Within 2 days, the images were circulating in specialized collector publications and in the general press. The signature had been verified by a handwriting analyst retained by 2 separate publications and by a former archivist who had spent 20 years working with primary Ferrari documentation. The consensus was unambiguous. Wyatt's phone did not stop for a week. The highest offer came from a collector in Switzerland, a figure with 7 digits that Wyatt would not share but that Diana, through the particular information networks of her industry, eventually learned was well above $4 million. There were other offers, most of them routed through intermediaries, some of them apparently from parties who did not want to be identified, which Wyatt found neither flattering nor relevant. He declined them all without drama and without extensive explanation, and eventually the calls slowed and then stopped. Carter attempted to position Hartman and Associates as a facilitating party for any potential sale, which Wyatt declined with a politeness so clean it was almost impossible to argue with. Carter argued with it anyway. Wyatt declined again with the same clean politeness, and that was the end of that. Luna saw the news on a classmate's tablet, forwarded from whatever coverage had reached the 12 and under set. She arrived home from school with the screen in her hand and her backpack still on and stood in the kitchen doorway. Dad, our car is famous. Wyatt was making dinner. He turned around, took the tablet, read the headline, handed it back. It's not new to us, he said. Are you going to sell it? He looked at her for a long moment. Do you want me to? She considered this with genuine seriousness. The 7-year-old deliberateness that does not know it is touching to watch. She set her backpack down. She climbed onto the kitchen stool. No, she said finally, because it's Grandpa's. Wyatt turned back to the stove. That's right. A week after the event, Giselle Hartman drove to the address listed in Wyatt's professional registry. The address led to a residential neighborhood in a suburb northwest of the city, where the houses were modest and the yards were either well-maintained or not maintained at all, with very little in between. Wyatt's property was the latter, a reasonable yard, in which a great deal of attention was being paid to things that were not the grass. She did not bring Carter. She did not bring Diana. She carried a small box from a bakery she had passed on the way, and she told herself in the car that the box was not a prop, not a gesture of performance, and she needed to be honest with herself about that distinction, or the entire thing was useless. It was, she believed, not a prop. She had stopped at the bakery because she had not known how to arrive empty-handed at the door of someone she had treated badly in front of other people, and the box had seemed like an honest acknowledgement of that difficulty rather than a calculated move. She knocked. Wyatt opened the door and looked at her without surprise. She wondered if Diana had said something, and suspected Diana had not, and concluded that he was simply a person who did not show surprise even when he felt it. I wanted to come myself, she said, not through anyone else. He stepped back from the door. She took this as an invitation and stepped inside. The house was small and clean, with the clean of someone who did not have excess space and had organized what they had with practical care. There were books on a low shelf, and a child's drawing on the refrigerator, and a photograph on the windowsill that she did not look at long enough to interpret. There was a smell of oil that she had by now come to associate with this man, and no longer found out of place. She set the box on the table. "I want to say it clearly," she said. "What I did, in the parking structure, was a public unkindness for no reason that mattered. The car's value, or the lack of it, had nothing to do with anything. And your daughter was there." She stopped. "I've been thinking about that part most." Wyatt looked at the box on the table, then at her. "She's all right," he said. "I know. But she asked you a question when she was walking away. I saw it." He did not confirm it or deny it. He simply looked at her, with that evenness that she was beginning to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of an unusually stable center of gravity. "Luna will be fine," he said. "She already is." "I know. People judge what they don't understand," he said then. "I've done it too. To other things, other people. It's worth remembering, is all." He said it without the tone of a lesson. He said it as a fact about human beings in general, himself included. Giselle looked at the box on the table. She looked at the photograph on the windowsill. A man who resembled Wyatt enough to be his father, standing beside a car she now recognized, in a yard somewhere warm, smiling at whoever was holding the camera. "Who took that photograph?" she asked. She didn't fully know why she asked it. "My mother," Wyatt said. 1973. He'd just gotten back from Italy. She looked at the photograph for another moment. The man in it was laughing at something. A real laugh. The kind that takes over your face before you've decided to let it. His hand was resting on the car's hood. Giselle turned back to Wyatt. "Your father loved that car," she said. "He loved what building it taught him," Wyatt said. "The car was evidence of that. He used to say he didn't build anything, he learned things, and the things he learned left behind a shape. That was the car." She had no answer for that. She was not certain an answer was required. She picked up the box from the table and held it out to him. "Luna will like these," she said. "There's a small one in there with pink frosting." The woman at the counter said it was their best one. Wyatt took the box. A small shift occurred in his expression, not forgiveness, exactly. Because forgiveness implied an accounting that neither of them was performing, but something more functional, the simple adjustment of two people who have had a difficult beginning and are deciding, without making a formal decision, to proceed past it. "She'll eat the frosting first," he said. "She always does." Giselle said goodbye and walked back to her car. She sat in it for a moment before starting the engine, looking at the gravel driveway and the house and the garage door that was slightly open, the darkness inside it broken by the visible edge of a familiar vehicle. She thought about a framework she had carried for 10 years, that the outside of a thing was the language of the inside of a thing, that surfaces told the truth about depth. She thought about a car she had looked at and seen nothing. She drove home. In the garage that evening, Wyatt heard the quiet of the neighborhood outside, and the smaller quiet of Luna, already asleep, and the deepest quiet, which was the one inside himself, that had been there since the morning his father died and had not left, but had over the years become something he could live near without flinching. He opened the hood. He did not do it to check anything. He did it because this was what he did in the evenings. This was where he went when the day was done, and the dishes were in the rack, and the house was its nighttime self. He stood at the engine and looked at it the way people look at photographs of people they love who are no longer reachable. Luna had seen the signature for the first time 3 days after the hotel event. He had opened the hood for her, crouched beside her, aimed the small flash